everyone. Welcome to our episode of Yale College Voices. And today I'm excited to introduce you to Marisa Figueira, who is a dedicated professional and plays a critical role here at Yale University. So Marissa's journey began at Yale in 2007. And over the years, she's had some remarkable contributions to the university's growth and development. Marisa has a background in HR and a strong commitment to fostering positive employee relations. She has continually demonstrated her expertise and leadership in this area. So in 2022, Marisa was selected as a member of the inaugural cohort of the Emerge Leadership Program, which I also just recently wrapped up. Emerge is a presidential initiative designed to retain staff and develop leaders throughout the campus. And Marisa is also our executive sponsor of our Yale College DEIB Advisory Committee. And then in 2023, so this year, Marisa achieved another significant milestone when you became part of Yale College as Director of Operations, where you coordinate operational efforts across the college. Marissa's responsibilities extend to the residential colleges as well as other departments, student affairs and engagement. Marisa plays a crucial role in the college's main interface with hospitality, facilities, and other university-wide operational functions. So Marissa's commitment to excellence and her ability to lead and manage teams it's been evident throughout her career. Her educational background includes degrees from Rutgers University and also University of New Haven. She also has held various roles in HR at Yale, including diversity coordinator in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. So I'm so happy to have you here today, Marisa. We've worked recently in our work with the DEIB Advisory Committee. So, I'm just so happy to have you here and happy to meet you. And we've had a chance to chat a little bit and get to know you. So I'd love to hear more about your journey and, what your journey was like in terms of your career before you joined Yale and then once you joined Yale until your current position today.
Thank you for having me, Doris.
Sure.
So my journey before Yale, it feels like, I've been here for over 15 years.
Wow.
It feels like my professional identity is sort of very closely sort of related and shaped by the university. So before Yale, so I did college. So I was at Rutgers Newark and really sort of started a lot of my professional career there, either as a college student or my sort of first official job was also at an academic institute that was part of Rutgers that had a very academic name, which still is the Institute on Ethnicity, Culture, and the Modern Experience.
Oh, wow.
It was
okay.
Mouthful, but it was an amazing place. When I started college, I still am just highly curious, interested in everything, in every job. I find everyone's roles really amazing. But I had a high interest in some sort of community work and social justice work. I did a lot of internships in New York and in various places in New Jersey. And then I started working with the Institute on Ethnicity, Culture, and the Modern Experience as one of my internships that then led to a job. And in that place, we were doing a lot of community educational work around civic justice and information and education on civic justice, including a lot of sort of now historical figures and really critical points in history, and doing large lecture series and just really great programming.
Oh, wow.
And I loved it deeply. My then boyfriend, so when I was in college, my then boyfriend told me that he was joining the Navy. And I walked out of the coffee shop that we were in. And then at some point, I'm not sure when, we sort of made up. And I left Rutgers to then go to South Carolina. So he was stationed in South Carolina.
Oh, okay.
So a bit of I'm sure my parents think a whim. We eloped. We moved to South Carolina. We lived in a naval base in South Carolina, which was a world that could not be more foreign from anything. Just from the military experience to living in the South. I had traveled quite a bit in high school, but I had not sort of living in a place is very different.
Right.
And when I moved to South Carolina, I had to really think about a job. I was 22, didn't drive, and needed to make some quick life adjustments. And I looked for nonprofit work because I was certainly deeply connected to wanting to do that. But there really isn't a nonprofit culture in the South that there was in the New York, New Jersey area. So I did find a career fair, and I walked up to the person that became my boss and said that he really should hire me to be an assistant, a human resources assistant.
Okay.
And this was for an orphanage in South Carolina, which was one of the few nonprofits. I had already sent them my resume, but I didn't hear back. And so I walked up to Tony and I said, I'm not sure why you haven't called me. You really should hire me for this job. And he told me my salary was too high, because the salaries in the South were very different. I was like, oh, that's very negotiable. Let's talk. I was like, and that really is when I started my HR career. And while it wasn't really sort of the social justice work that I really had kind of like envisioned, it really was about like community work in a differently defined community. So like the employer and sort of that workforce as a community. And I loved it. Really? I also thought that at the time that we would move around quite a bit as a result of my husband's job. And I was like, oh, I guess it's hard to find nonprofit work, but could I do HR? Because wherever we move, somebody needs to get hired and fired. And so it went from just like kind of really high concept dreams about sort of social justice work to then being sort of more of a more thoughtful approach to a professional career. So my husband was stationed in Connecticut. And as we were moving to Connecticut, I knew Yale as a university. And I knew universities employed people because I had worked at Rutgers. So that really was the only employer I knew in Connecticut. Really? And I started applying for jobs even before we moved because I was like, that's the only reference point I had. And they did. So
that's awesome.
I started then, we moved in August of 2007, and I started at Yale in December of 2007 as an assistant in human resources employee relations.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Wow, that's an awesome journey. So I'm curious about your experience, like you said, before coming to Yale and working in a nonprofit and being interested in social justice. And, you mentioned your experience with the, was it culture and modern experience? And
that's cool. Yes, that's good.
Okay. And, so I'm curious what drew you to that area, when you started your college years, what drove you into that?
So I think probably, we're all sort of shaped by so many different things. I moved to the U.S. when I was 10, and I moved from a very small village in Portugal to Newark, New Jersey. And those two worlds just could not have been more different in really great ways and some sort of less great ways, but I mean, very different.
Really?
Like a small village cannot be understated. It was a very small village.
Yeah.
And I think as a kid, which is, I think, common in most kids, there's always like a sense of like, is that fair? Is that fair? So I certainly was always a very vocal child.
Really?
In a so I have a large family, or I mean, I only have one sister, but sort of my parents come from very large families, so a lot of cousins. And even when I lived in Portugal, I remember I was my grandpa's favorite, which, maybe some debate, but I think it's pretty true.
Right.
And my grandpa would have some of us sit in the dining, so like for like larger, usually like religious holidays like Easter, and there's sort of like the adults table and the kids table, and neither of these were fancy tables, but certainly like he would always like ask me to go to the adults table, and there were sort of cousins my age who there just was a different relationship with for a variety of reasons. And I remember being like, if they can't sit at the table, then I'm gonna sit in the kitchen with them. Also, they are way more fun than all the old people. But even that, I was always sort of like assessing sort of how people directly and indirectly sort of like valued others, like including like in my own family dynamic. And I come from a very traditional family, from thoughts around women and etc. So, so from very sort of traditional ways. So there was always that. But even when I moved to the U.S., I mean, not fifth grade, but even in seventh grade and eighth grade, there were sort of some very visible, distinct ways in which students were treated. We were a school of all immigrant kids in some capacity, from all capacities. Like I don't think most of us would not have been U.S. born, but you were either from a variety of places, from Africa, from Central South America, Caribbean, Europe, but there was a huge mix of kids, but it was very, very clear in the way in which kids were treated based on sort of skin color, in behavior. So kids that talked a little bit more were sort of treated differently than quiet kids. There's sort of presumptions made around sort of like skin tone. And I would say tone in part because few were white, but they were still within like a very clear division when you looked at the way in which we were all sort of ranked in classes and how those classes were treated. And I have like very strong feelings about that treatment, about sort of like those observations, and then even ways in which we were not. The schools mostly now are uniformed, even public schools. We were not a uniform public school, but how then we were sort of told to dress for particular occasions, which I had huge issues with. So even I wasn't really sort of forming these ideas, but I had a lot of issues, thoughts, and pushback around like how we ought to be treated or not. And then in high school, I mean, can you imagine like as a teenager, then obviously there was...
all the things that come along with being a teenager.
Yes, but like that was sort of like turned up to high. There was even basic things. I remember chanting Title IX in high school without actually knowing what it was, and then learning what it was. Right. In part because like our soccer uniforms were literally the uniforms from the boys team from the year before. And so we didn't have like our names in the back, but Joe would have like, you just sort of write your name like on a tag on it was literally their like old dirty uniforms from the year before, and they're huge
big,
on us, and we would all chant like I was a freshman and I was like, what is this Title IX that we're saying?
But you were protesting, right?
Already, yes, without knowing what I was saying. So there was high engagement, little knowledge. And then in high school, I was also a high school debater. That was really sort of my biggest activity, and I spent a lot of time doing that. And while there's sort of a lot to be said about sort of the public school system that I was in, there was this amazing grant to the city of Newark for high school debate. So there had been preceding debate teams, not even in my high school, actually at another high school, that were led by a former Yale alum, or not, I guess, from a Yale alum. So he was one of the debate teachers at the other high school. So it really kind of like had a lot of traction. And I joined the debate team, and it was the way in which we were able to sort of gain exposure like academically, where sort of it was absent really in the classroom, and just kind of gain structure and knowledge. And we got to go travel the U.S. for debate tournaments for free, which we would never have been able to afford, but it was really a great opportunity to think more academically and sort of also be exposed. Like that's I came to Yale 3 times in high school, 3 different years for like the debate tournament. So that was sort of my knowledge of the campus.
Yeah.
But then that sort of really kind of like emboldened me and all my high school rhetoric around
That's awesome.
the sense of like justice and wanting to do some work. Yeah.
That's amazing. See, I had no idea. I didn't know all these things
Oh,
about
but you could tell
That's
that I was a
awesome.
very annoying high schooler.
Yeah, really?
I mean, most people get that from afar, like in high school. Yeah. My parents were like, got it.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Oh, that's great though. That's awesome. How, based on your experience in high school, and it's interesting hearing your story because those are, between, let's say, 15 to 24, those are the years that you really form,
formative.
who you are. You could become pretty much who you are at the core, right? And then, of course, we grow into adults and things change, but our experiences when we're coming up shape us, right? So I'm curious when you take that experience, and then as I mentioned earlier, you were part of the first cohort of the Emerge Leadership Program, and I was also part of the second cohort. And one of the discussions that my cohort had revolved around, our core values, how we were brought up, and those experiences early on in childhood, going into high school and college. For you, how did those experiences influence your approach to leadership and your current role here at the college?
I think that like grace, so like as a manager, as an employee, as a colleague, I think that grace is really, really important. I mean, there's respect and sort of all of these other values, but growing up and sort of just understanding like perhaps people are not coming. I mean, people are coming from their perspective, and there need sort of grace is sort of a space to be created to, even if you don't have the time or capacity to understand, that you will at least pause before you react. And while the fairness and treatment are sort of like at my sort of very core things that I always sort of feel very deeply about, kind of just that sort of isn't a value unto itself if it doesn't come then with the understanding of the situation at hand.
Right.
And kind of creating that space and giving that space. And grace comes like as a value that I hope to extend because it's one that I deeply need.
Right.
I'm just like,
yes.
I'm just trying
right.
here.
Yes.
And that is like from parenting to work to all my, I'm like, cooking.
Right.
I'm like, just trying.
Just trying.
Like, does it meet some minimum standard in some ways? And sometimes that's kind of what we need.
Yeah.
But it's really something that I feel that I need and that I've been given, thankfully, so much that I hope to be able to extend to others.
Awesome. That's great. And I think that's important. Like you said, we're all not going to be perfect at everything that we do, and juggling all of these things that you just mentioned, like trying to be a good parent, trying to be a good employee, and, being a good leader, and all of these things. And
being a great podcast host.
I'm trying. You're right. I'm trying.
You're doing. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. And it's almost like we can be harder on ourselves. And we don't allow that grace for ourselves, right? But, it's a thing that you constantly have to remind yourself of. You have to give yourself grace.
Yeah, that's true.
And then, also be able to do that for others. So I'm curious, in terms of your role with the DEIB committee, because we had a conversation too of just about, it's like I'm trying, right? And stepping into a new role in a committee where, that was already formed.
Yep.
and it's almost like being the new kid at school because it's a committee that was established and people have already sort of built relationships and things like that. And then you're, coming into a new committee with, some uncertainty in terms of, okay, how do I, just how do I fit into this role, and what can you do to contribute to the goals of the committee? And I'm curious, or if you'd like to share, how do you think you'll take your early experiences and, like you said, fighting for justice and wanting to give folks grace, your early childhood experiences, like even your experience on the debating team and all of those things. How do you think you'll tie that into your experience on the committee, or how you'll contribute to the committee as well?
Yeah.
So.
Time will tell. No,
Time will tell.
No, I think that like the committee, it's no different than coming into a new role.
Right.
Especially at Yale, where like we're just so deeply relational, and it's one of the things that I really love about Yale. And that's great, but also that in the initial, until you have the relationships, it could feel a little bit isolating. I could feel a little bit as an outsider until you're sort of on the inside. So there's nothing like strong than sort of feeling like the bond of being within with that period of time of that shift, and that's me as much as it is really anyone else. And often I actually think it's me and sort of in my own head and sort of my own insecurities. But I have a role in the committee. Other members have a role in the committee, but is certainly one where there is a lot of like mutual interest and mutual passion.
Right.
That we're trying to like understand like really what is each one's role and value, and sort of like what can somebody bring to the table, and sort of strengths and interests. But they don't inherently conflict. We're not fighting against. We're not fighting against. A different mission and vision for the group. And that I think that sort of like inherently, even without explicitly describing that, I think everyone's sort of wanting to move in the same direction, which is huge. I mean, think about like a project team. Sometimes you are just rowing in very different directions.
Right.
So it's trying to, especially where there was existing committee members, so understanding, learning, sort of seeing, right? You kind of like, I sort of like observe,
right?
And I'm trying to figure out, like, it's like a sort of like jumping rope. You kind of want to sort of see, but
like, where do I dive in?
Yeah, I don't want to sort of like come in to sort of like my role is not to dictate anything. It's to be a committee member, sort of value there, and then also trying to see like where I can provide then in sort of my role as the executive sponsor.
Yes,
as the executive sponsor, like then what are the expectations from the committee to me that I could engage with university or YCDO leadership, and then sort of like leverage that and sort of like defining that jointly as a group.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. And I think that's like you said, it's important to remember we're all working on the same goal or initiatives, right? The end result is what we're really trying to get at, and we're happy to have you as our executive sponsor, because you sort of need that person to clear the obstacles. Once we've sort of defined all of our action items for the coming year, then it's like, okay, now we need clear the way. and that's critical, because we can't, if we don't have that support, then we probably wouldn't get as much, wouldn't make as much progress as we'd like. So it's awesome to have you. I'm wondering about your, going back to your background in HR and your employee relations. Does anything stand out in your mind, like a particular, moment, or, a pivotal moment where you felt that, it just changed your perspective in terms of wanting to continue this as a career? And then also, what made you, how did you get to director of operations at
Yeah.
Yale College? What brought you into Yale College from your previous role?
Um, I feel like there's been a lot of really, really amazing, like personal and professional kind of like markers
Mm-hmm.
in my 15 years, which all have been like up to now in HR,
Mm-hmm.
but it really has been a very special place for me. I was already married, but I was not a mother.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a community that
Right.
like in many ways
Yes.
helped me
Mm-hmm.
be a better mother. I
Yeah.
didn't grow up with a tooth fairy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember going to my colleagues and being like, what do we
What's the tooth
do?
fairy?
I know what it is, but like, do we like how much money? So all of these things that like they're just it's a community of colleagues
Yeah.
and friends,
Mm-hmm.
and that also sort of transfers to a lot of sort of professionally doing a lot of checking in
Yeah. Yeah.
and getting a lot of support and
Mm-hmm.
having just amazing managers and
Yeah.
leaders.
Yeah.
Certainly, I'm like, do I name them? Do I not? But I will.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that there's been a lot of amazing mentors and leaders, including
Mm-hmm.
like I had Karen Wu years ago,
Mm-hmm.
Andre Torillian,
Mm-hmm.
Geraldine Sullivan have
Mm-hmm.
been really critical parts from an HR structure
Mm-hmm.
of my um, professional career.
Mm-hmm.
Um, one, I have sort of two stories to share, and I think I'm
Sure.
going to share this one
Yeah.
that
I'd love to hear.
I think it's going to land possibly differently.
Okay.
So we'll sort of see how. I just feel like I have a very different take on this story,
Yeah.
which is so when I started at Yale in
Mm-hmm.
2007,
Mm-hmm.
so December 2007,
Mm-hmm.
it was a really rough transition,
Mm-hmm.
really rough transition
Mm-hmm.
to the university,
Okay.
and that's I was just all the things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just nameless
Right.
things.
Right.
And I had my probation extended, which sort of the other inverse is
Oh,
I could
wow.
have failed my probation.
Wow.
And I've sort of shared this, but it always feels like sort of this big thing. But this
Yeah.
is like sort of like the grace and the opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really important that was done. I ended up, it was just sort of rough,
Mm-hmm.
but it was a great opportunity that allowed me to then sort of like
Mm-hmm.
continue a career that's now been sort of like 15 years.
Yeah.
That was tough and important and sort
Mm-hmm.
of all the things.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like one of those sort of like failures that like sort of, I don't know. Anyway, so I don't know how that sort of sounds.
Yeah. No.
But to me, it's like part of my story.
Absolutely.
I've fallen on my face so many times. Like it doesn't like that. Those are not the components that I have a hard time ever sharing.
Mm-hmm.
But I always feel like people are like, ugh, that's awkward. It isn't. It just
Right.
is like
And I think,
part of.
yeah, and I've always felt that, whether it's with my colleagues or leaders here at Yale or anywhere, being able to admit where you misstepped or admitting a failure, but
Yeah.
also where you, how you've grown from it or whatever you've learned from it. That to me gains more respect,
Yeah.
because not many folks were comfortable with admitting,
Oh, I have.
you know,
So many. If ever you have a lot of time, there's no shortage of time. But I think that's like the reality for a lot.
yeah,
I don't think that many of us are like needing to have probations extended.
right.
That is very much sort of like part of my story. But
Mm-hmm.
just there was better times and then there was worse times.
Right.
And to me, it was also like I then was in many roles, were sort of when I then became an HR generalist and
Mhm.
even as an assistant and a director and sort of at that HR capacity, I was
Mhm.
having a lot of conversations about people that were about their job security ultimately.
Right.
And there's a pretty clear lens as to like how that feels.
Mhm.
And or how like those difficult conversations
Yeah.
feel, right? Because you're
Yeah.
sort of like often just on the other side of it.
Right. Right.
But so that's kind of like sort of my personal story. One that I shared actually recently with my son is I sort of sat in and sort of worked with I don't think the, maybe she no I don't think at the time she was my boss, but she had previously been my boss, Andre Trillian, and I was sort of like supporting her sort of on the sidelines on an investigation that she was working on, and it was difficult, it was hard, and as is often the case, sort of the employee comes into a lot of these conversations defensive because job security and
Yeah.
you're sort of uncertain of outcomes.
Mhm.
And through the meetings that I was a part of, watching an employee go from defensiveness to transparency,
Mhm.
even if that transparency in some ways is like hoping that that would then have better outcomes,
Right.
but creating a space that somebody will then share the information that you need professionally to then make an assessment, and communicating to the employee a decision that was not in their interest at all, and doing that with like such humanity. And the person commented on that to her and
Wow.
said they disagree, etc. But how much they appreciated the way in which they were treated in that conversation.
Wow.
And when you're giving good news,
Yeah.
it's one thing.
Right.
When you are asking somebody to share information that they otherwise were keeping for a long
Right.
period of time, and then that the sharing that information didn't yield,
Right.
it sort of yielded an ending of employment for the person,
Mm-hmm.
but them feeling like they were treated well in that process is it's not as easy to do as it might seem. I think that
Yes.
we all kind of want to hope that we're the person that like no matter what, but that is there's always like something to learn from the person from
Yeah.
their perspective, but also then sort of to watch how you can, in our sort of HR terms, investigate, get sort of to the bottom of information, make the right institutional decision, and still have the person feel that they were treated humanely.
Right.
When it's something that critical. And I'm trying to think why I was sort of sharing this with my son, because I think that he was sort of sharing some of like you kind of never know, or like the importance of just always wanting to treat somebody with like a level of respect. Like there's no binaries, like we're not all good and all bad.
Right. Right.
And a lot of tough decisions have to be made, but you could make a tough decision without having to disregard somebody's humanity in the process. And I knew that. I hope that I did that, but I learned so much from watching it being done.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, that's an amazing story. Because I mean, it's obviously a situation that isn't comfortable for the person on the receiving end, and for that person to come out of that experience and still be able to say that, still be able to say something positive about an overall negative experience. I mean, that's amazing, because I think it's important to, like you said, no matter what the situation is, to treat people with dignity and respect. Because for all and I don't know if you've ever crossed paths with a person ever again, but people take experiences with them, and you never know what situation they'll be in later.
Yep.
And how they might treat someone else, and what that impact makes on them. And that's amazing to me, because I'll bet you that wherever this person went, that they keep that in mind, how you treated them. They keep that in mind in terms of how they treat others, or whatever situation they've been in.
Yeah. Or I think that the person could question a lot about the ultimate decision and feel how they might feel, but in their own words, a sense of appreciation for for how you're treating somebody. Like a lot of us have to make difficult decisions on a daily basis, right?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
saying no to our children
Right.
is not easy.
Yeah. They're very persuasive.
But as managers, right? Like and sometimes the easiest thing seems to be to just like give the person what they want or say no because you don't want to make them feel bad. But there's ways in which we can communicate important information that's important to them. It's important to you.
Right.
Without kind of sort of like stripping, kind of like that. Like, we're all like, you've made a mistake. That's, I mean, sometimes it's not fine. But you've made a mistake, and communicating that doesn't mean that like you're not valuable as a human being, right? And sometimes like the way in which we communicate some information could seem like we could sort of be thoughtful about how to communicate it clearly. Like, oh, that's uncool, but not that you like or not value, like you shouldn't like exist on planet Earth anymore because you didn't cross a T, right? There's sort of like a balance in which you do that.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow, that's a great story. I'm curious about, in terms of, going back to the DEIB committee, and we all, we had our meeting recently and we're brainstorming, and I was just curious if you had some ideas about what you envision or what you hope to accomplish, let's say in the next year, whether as a committee or even just as your contribution to the committee. Were there any, for me anyway, there are little sparks of ideas that come to mind that of course I'll share with the committee later, but I'm curious if you had little sparks of ideas that, just jumped into your head that you'd like to see implemented or at least, we figure out how we can, approach those things in the next year.
So when we think about like the pre and the current, meaning, well, from the very technical, like the posters, like so like our sort of pre-charge and then the current charge that we're sort of like engaging in. I feel that this sort of aligns best kind of where my mind was, which seems to be a more staff-centric approach. Not, I mean, we are an academic institution, we are employer, we sort of are many things. But to me, the kind of belonging work that I think I thought like would be most impactful to the immediate community, and that I think is really where the conversation was last week, is like about us as a community of staff, and like is the is the cobbler's kid wearing shoes, right? That we certainly want to continue to impact positively our relationship with students, ensuring that we continue to have a diverse and welcoming student body. But there's sort of in our previous charge, I think sort of included a lot of what we do as an academic institution and as an undergraduate college, which I sort of fully support. I think that the conversation about being focused a little bit more on us is also what we need, because it's really easy to us putting our professional hats on, and it isn't really easy, and sort of trying to move. That's obviously that's not true, because it's really hard to sort of do our professional jobs and feel like there's an impact there. But I see kind of our university's belonging initiative as being very internal focused, and I think that the items we last discussed at the meeting are really thinking about our development, our sense of like community within, not just community, sort of with the other sort of populations that we work with. And so to me, it sort of feels like we are all kind of on that same page. And I'm like, oh, is this also because I'm in HR and this is sort of what feels natural? And I think it's a yes, but it felt that this was not sort of like I wasn't sort of managing up those responses, that this is what we had seen from our surveys, this is we had seen from our meeting and from the community membership itself, committee membership itself. So it just felt sort of like it aligned. But I think that sort of staff impact and how do we make everyone feel that they are part of the community and have an equal opportunity to the resources of the community is really, really important.
That's awesome. Great. So I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit more about your, your current role
Yep.
as director of operations. And has there, so you've been in the role since April of
May,
this year,
yeah.
May. Has there again been, have any experiences sort of stood out for you over the last several months? Like, is there something that, just in terms of coming into this community? I mean, we're all here at Yale, but we have little pockets of communities in different departments and areas. And I was just curious if there's like a memorable moment that stood out for you during your time so far.
I will first say that I corrected you just to give myself grace. Of like, hasn't been that long. Okay. I don't know anything yet. Sort of in terms of what has stood out, I came into the role having been at Yale for a long time, having at one point been the HR generalist for Yale College. So, I think I know some things, and I knew that I didn't know a lot of things. And I was right. I did not know a lot of things, but that is, it's like just the layers on the onion, sort of just keep peeling and peeling and peeling. Yes. I mean, to me, that's like great and fascinating. Right. It's daunting on a bad day. On most days, it's like really great and fascinating. But our sort of residential life. So I work very closely sort of like on residential with our assistant directors of operations and who sort of work in all the 14 colleges. And as you mentioned, with our partners in facilities and hospitality and sort of other large sort of service providers to the college. And I knew how much it takes to sort of move the ginormous wheel and rock that like doing all of this work is, but it's wild. It's wild how big and sort of small events. By events, I don't mean like sort of like a party. I mean sort of like big like calendar activities, academic calendar activities, and it's a lot of people. It's a lot of effort, and it's astounding and amazing. That like things that on the outside will look sort of like seamless. It's hard to know. I don't know like how students perceive them necessarily at this point, but the level of like passion and engagement that our staff have is so admirable to me. I feel like I've often worked with people that really love their jobs, but like our residential college staff, like all of them will sort of speak about like, the students in a way that is like so deeply connected, like they're so connected to the work that they are doing. And this is really all of our staff in the college that you feel like you're, so I was walking around on move-in day and how I wasn't doing anything. I was just walking around. And I've seen move-in day so many times. And this year I sort of saw the lead up, all the insane amount of work. But then even the staff, and it's just a long day, and they've had like a crazy week leading up to it. But you could see how excited they are for the students to come in, and they love it versus it's like quiet in the summer. But like that sort of level of like connection to work to me feels like what it felt to work in like a small nonprofit. Like feeling that like we are here, and I think it's hard for a lot of us, like we are all here for the mission. I've had many jobs across campus, but like do you feel like how close do you feel to that mission? And I think that our staff feel the closest, which makes sense because I think we're at the very core of it. And it feels sort of quite special to sort of like see and watch that from the staff, because like I'm sure all of us, or a vast majority of us, work because we have to. But then sort of like find something that you could cling on to get through the bad days. And then seeing that being their relationships with our students
Mm-hmm.
and with the residents of the college
Mm-hmm.
feels very impressive and just inspiring.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Yeah. That's awesome because like you said, it's at the core of what we're here for, right? And you're right. Like when I interact with the college staff,
Yeah.
um, it's almost like the students are their kids,
Yes. Yeah.
like that's family. Like they know, they get to know the students and work together and
Yeah.
all of those things. And that's the beauty of why we're here
Yeah.
and seeing, it's like, for example, for me, I'm more of, IT is a little more behind the scenes.
Yep.
We don't interact as much with students, but it's nice to see what we're contributing to.
Yeah. It
you
feels
know?
tangible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like what we do does, it matters.
Yeah.
And, here's the, the output of
Yep.
what we're doing. And yeah, it's a wonderful feeling,
Yeah. And I'll say that it's certainly like the staff. So of all of the staff that contributes to this and sort of contributes to the
Yes.
direct college experience,
Right.
a vast majority of them I don't have a reporting relationship to.
Right.
So like our administrative staff, our
Right.
deans, but our facilities and custodial staff. So one of
Yes.
the things that I'm most excited about is senior week,
Mhm.
not just because the semester will
Yeah,
be,
yeah.
the academic year will be over, but when I came in last year,
Mm-hmm.
it was, so I started in May, so it
Mhm.
was really kind of like everyone's sort of
Oh,
like on that
yes.
high of all the
Right.
celebration
Yep.
of the activities pre-commencement.
Mhm.
And I, even when I worked in HR with facilities and hospitality, I knew of senior week, I knew of senior dinners,
Mhm.
where our students are giving accolades to and gratitudes to all of our staff that they
Mhm.
work with,
Oh, wow.
including, and I always heard this, like including our custodial staff, including our dining hall staff.
Mhm.
And now when I walk around campus, like that is their community. And you sort of, I knew that intuitively.
Yeah.
And when I worked in diversity and inclusion, I worked with someone who's no longer at the university, John Armendariz. He was my director then. And we had put together a proposal, and geez, this is like 10 years ago. It was like pre my son.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
maybe 11 years ago.
Right.
And it was a proposal to for a professional conference, and our sort of pitch was that in order to get sort of results on student diversity and on student community, that our effort needed to be around staff diversity, right? That there's a lot of focus of like, how do we diversify student populations? And our pitch, which was not accepted at the
Oh, wow.
conference, was
Interesting.
around staff diversity, that our students interact more with, and sort of studies show that our students, not just, if you just walk around,
Yeah.
we have 10,000 staff,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
We don't have 10,000 faculty.
Right.
And our students interact more with staff than they do with faculty, than they do in some ways with one another. And that's really where they're sort of developing close relationships. And that in order to make the best decisions for that population, the people making the decisions also needed to be diverse.
Right.
But then so that the students sort of feel a sense of like that community,
Yes.
that they needed to see a diverse staff.
Right.
And so we were not, like, our pitch was not selected. Maybe I'm still a little, I still have feelings about that. I think we were right and ahead of our time.
Right.
But I sort of see that
Absolutely.
now.
Yeah.
I sort of see that kind of like in action, in the impact.
Yes.
Someone was mentioning the other day that a former student, so they worked in one of the colleges, they are now retired, that a former student invited them to their 40th birthday party.
Oh,
which is
wow.
amazing.
Yeah.
Like that is, and so there continues to be this connection, but that's not
Right.
surprising. I mean,
Yes.
you are 18, between 17, 18, 19,
Yeah.
away from home.
Right.
You have good friends, but sort of the adults in the space
Yes.
are also providing explicit and implicit critical services for the students. And you see, like, you go into the dining halls, like they know everyone's name.
I know. It's so crazy.
And it's so impressive.
Yeah.
I love that.
Me too. I really do. I'm always amazed. I happen to help work on the Yale. It's called Yale Faces
Okay. Yeah.
app,
Yeah.
and we the deans get to know, and head of colleges heads of colleges get to know all of the students. And I'm always just amazed that they can do that on top of their normal duties and figuring out their names and just getting to know them and where they're from and their interests and all these things. And that amazes me. I mean, I have trouble remembering names myself, but to imagine the amount of energy it would take to get to know a few hundred students and develop relationships with all of these students.
In a sense of comfort, right? I mean, like often, right? I mean, there's all the ways in which they interact. So a lot of the students will be student age.
Right.
So, but it's also like when you need something and where are you going to look for that comfort?
Exactly.
And that was provided to them. I'm sure that this person was not invited to somebody's 40th birthday party because they were, dismissive of them, right? That's quite a marker for someone. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it kind of goes back to what you said earlier, just in terms of how you treat someone.
Yeah.
It has a lasting impact. I mean, for a 40th birthday party, that's,
I know,
30, what is that, like 20, 30 years later, that person still remembers how you treated them.
They get like, staff will get like announcements about engagements and I mean, it's to all the milestones.
Right.
And
that's awesome.
Yeah.
And that's an awesome feeling because and I think that's why I don't really know, I don't know the statistics about, staff and longevity in the colleges or anything like that. But I do know that when I came on board to Yale College and so I've been in Yale College for 12 years.
Yeah.
But I know the college staff had already been working in the colleges for decades for some of them. And then you see why, because it's just this long-term relationship that they develop with students. And kind of going, one other point I wanted to come back to that you made is just, it's unfortunate that your proposal wasn't accepted, but it brought up a great point that having a diverse staff is important to students because it kind of links all the way back to that, feeling of belonging. Yeah. When you see people who are like you in various roles, various, modes here on campus, it makes a huge difference in terms of their feeling of belonging here on campus. And I think that's important, like you said, in terms of our staff development and developing a diverse staff and having different faces all over. And
even the sense of like modeling and like professional opportunities.
Yes.
Right. That we're all looking around and up, like we're constantly assessing. I think like at our sort of deep core, we're sensing, is this place a threat or is this place not a threat? Right. That's kind of, I think we're always doing that. Like the amount of energy, I feel like I should be way thinner. The amount of energy.
If it could only be that easy.
Right. If my anxiety made me thinner. But I think we're sort of, all of us were always assessing that. And some of us more than others and many more than me at any given time. And how do we kind of create that space? Because me telling somebody that like, oh, I accept everyone, et cetera, sort of all the platitudes around sort of creating a space are quite different than how I actually kind of engage, right? My behaviors are very different than my claims. And it's those behaviors that we're always watching for one another. And that certainly is true for students.
Yes.
I'm coming into a role where I'm working sort of broadly in operations, closely with the residential colleges. I was not a student in residence. And to me, it's 41-year-old me is like anxious about 17-year-old me coming to a place like this. Right. And I mean, I was anxious, but I was a commuting student.
Me
but
too.
Even as we think about like our population, we're increasing the number of students who are first year college students. And the playbook just over generations, you don't have kind of like a playbook to resources, or sort of somebody that even in your own family or your network that is like, oh, this is how you get this or that.
Right.
So like a lot of what we're doing is also stepping back and
Yeah.
how do we ensure that everybody has the information? It's there, but do you know where it is?
Where it is, or
and
who to
you
ask.
right, and who to ask. And a lot of it is how do we also then sort of support the continued evolving student body that we have,
Right.
as generations have different needs and different focuses. But certainly like being a first generation college student is very different. And I was going to say it has to be, but I was a first generation college student. It just is like
Yeah.
you don't always have a network that exists in other places, or just like a spoken language around
Right.
a lot of what happens through, gosh, when I think about like my college, high school to college process, and where my parents were very supportive, but very limited in
Right.
terms of like, they were very supportive and they're like, yes,
Yes,
you should,
right, you
you
should.
could.
Yeah.
But like no sense
Reasons,
really at
yeah.
all about what any of it, how to
The
at all of the
yeah,
process.
like the resources, right? Or,
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, they also like, we're not English. There's
Yeah.
a lot of factors,
Right.
but then also kind of not knowing the system, broad, like about applications and all.
Like the process and
I
who to
didn't
go
even know
to.
that people did college tours. I thought it was like one of the new wave things. Like, oh,
When I think back, oh my gosh, when I think back to my experience, and I was a commuting student too, and there were so many things I didn't know, and this is a conversation I had with my other guests this week. I was introverted and shy. I some things I managed to figure out along the way, but I feel like I missed out on so much because I just didn't, I didn't know who to ask or who to talk to. And the way things were structured, if you weren't like sort of an extroverted, loud, student, then no one really paid attention to you. And, so there could be all sorts of events and things going on. And if you talked a lot, or you happen to come by and pester the person in the office frequently, they took care of you. But if you were really shy, there really wasn't anything. So I feel like I missed out on so much because I wasn't on campus. I commuted, and I just didn't know. I didn't know who to talk to or who to ask. And I had this very same or similar conversation with my prior guests in terms of our roles and responsibilities here at Yale College for, not excluding the ones that are okay with advocating for themselves, but like not forgetting about students who are in that kind of situation and what that must feel like. And, you whatever we can do to help them in that process so that they know what the resources are and know who to ask, questions or where to go. And, all of those things I can only imagine how scary it is.
Yeah. My husband tells me all the time,
Really?
he's reserved and introverted, about how the world really just is meant for the extroverted.
Yes.
It's kind of like for right-handed and
Right.
extroverted people.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Even our son is still like in his 5th grade school, they still have you don't have individual desks. I mean, you have like
they
your
group
desk,
them,
but
right?
everything is grouped.
Yes.
And he's like, how?
Yeah.
To him, it's my son is not introverted. Actually, the group setting is probably
it's good for him.
Distracting, perhaps.
Yes.
But I could see every time we go into the classroom, I could see the pain on my husband's face, thinking if
Really?
he had to sit in a group to do his work, he just wants to do his work by himself. But this is, I certainly cannot take any credit because I learned of it sort of on the roll. But even our Yale camp, so like when the students come in for orientation week, there was a camp it was called Reserved for introverted students, which I
was so happy when I saw that.
Right?
That's awesome. Yeah. I was like, I wish that could have been around, when I went to school, because that's so important, because like I said, you miss out on so much because you're just kind of close. You start
Yeah.
to isolate yourself and you're shy. Um, and like I said, you don't know who to ask for various resources, or you don't even know what to ask
Yeah.
because you don't even know if it exists or not.
Right. Exactly. Oh, right. Yeah.
You
You don't
know,
know like how to advocate or ask or
right?
push.
Yeah.
Um, so you might not believe this, but I wasn't necessarily shy in college, but it was also where like there was, when you sign up for classes, I just signed up for what I liked.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't even talk to a counselor.
Really.
Yes, there was really not in high school, not
Mm-hmm.
in college.
Mm-hmm.
My first 2 years were amazing. I
Mm-hmm.
was doing like all high level classes, like
Wow.
small
Uh-huh.
seminars, and it was the best. And
Really?
then they're
That's
like,
awesome.
you have to
And they
do
let
these like,
you.
there was no
There
restrictions.
was no restriction. Oh my
I
gosh.
did my first year in the
Mhm.
spring. I did a pre-law
Oh
seminar.
my
It
goodness.
was so great. It was
Yeah.
so great.
Mm-hmm.
We went to DC.
Oh,
We saw the Supreme Court
oh
enact. It was
wow.
amazing.
Yeah.
Everyone else there were third or fourth years,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I was like, that's right, I'm cool.
Exactly.
So I loved it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
then like the rude awakening of you actually have to do things that you don't like, which is
Yes.
all the
The
101. So then I was
101s,
doing
yeah.
that my third year and it
Oh
was
my goodness.
so boring.
Yeah. I can imagine.
But I just like so to me it was always like, oh, no one said I couldn't.
Right. No
So
one said
I'm
right.
like, good times. I'm
Exactly.
like thinking
Right.
like I mean, I also had plenty of more conventional fun in
Yeah,
college,
yeah.
but I love these like classes.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
the best.
That's
And then
awesome.
I had to wrap up my year with all the boring stuff.
Right. Those are oh man, when I
That
think
was
back to that,
painful.
I remember those days
It was
when
so
you
painful.
kind of push off, you
Yeah.
postpone as long as you can until they say, oh no, you have to fulfill this requirement.
Yes. So it never kept me from doing the classes that I wanted, but then
Hmm.
it kept me from graduating. I was
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
like,
Like you
do I
have to do it.
really need to do this? And they're like, yes, why wouldn't you?
Right, right. Oh man.
But yeah.
That's great. Oh man. Well, Marissa, it has been a pleasure. Again, just getting to know you even more, even beyond our few conversations we had over the summer. Um, so, we're at our hour now, and I'd like to wrap up with a couple things that you mentioned early on, and just throughout the whole conversation. Giving yourself grace
Yeah.
that has come up. That's been a frequent topic that has come up with my past guests, and um, it's important, right? Like we all misstep, right?
Yeah.
We all misstep, and we figure out what that misstep is or what the mistake may have been, and hopefully learn from it. And I loved your story that you shared early on with your experience here at Yale, and it goes to show you that people make mistakes, or things happen, but you can always turn it back
Yeah.
around and turn it into something positive. So I'm just wondering if you have anything that you'd like to, a final note that you'd like to share, or any ideas that you'd like to share about the podcast, or your time here at Yale College, or anything like that we could end on.
Well, I'll say that I really appreciate this opportunity.
Oh,
So I feel like perfect setting for me to talk about myself. Thank you.
and that's the goal.
Yeah. But I love this opportunity, and I really now as I sort of shared off mic, I was waiting for my session before I listened to the other sessions.
Did you?
As an avid podcaster, I'm very excited
Really?
to listen
Oh.
to the other recordings that you have. I just didn't want to feel less than as
Right.
I
Oh,
showed up at the
no.
mic.
You wouldn't have.
But I think that this is great and sort of around what I think our DIB committee is looking to do, which is how do we know each other better? How do we understand each other better? Especially in a place like Yale where it's relationship driven.
Yes.
And which I think is fine and good. I don't mean that as a sort of a pejorative. I think that we need the relationships. And I think that a lot of us we just sort of want to be on the right side of those relationships and sort of feeling understood and heard. And I think that a lot of it goes to understanding our colleagues. So you're providing a perfect vehicle for that. And I really appreciate it. And I don't know that I have any wisdom to sort of
that actually was
to wrap. But yeah, this was great.
That was great. And yes, absolutely. That was the goal, of trying to create this podcast, and even going back to that whole introverted student. And like I said, I'm still kind of introverted, so this is stepping outside of my comfort zone.
But you also did it in a very smart way, which is from like a controlling way, right? Where like you're asking. Right? I find that this is you knowing yourself and knowing how to push.
Right.
In a way that you're creating something new and valuable I think that this was a very smart, like this was great for us, and I think great for you, but I think that it was a very smart way of thinking about your strengths versus it being
and it's helped me in different ways, just in terms of my professional development, but also just in terms of my relationships with my colleagues and folks that I've interviewed so far on the podcast. It's I always try to remember daily, no matter what my interactions may be. And sometimes interactions can be they're positive or negative or not, medium, somewhere in the middle. You just you don't know everyone's background until you have a chance to have a conversation with them. You don't know what they could be going through, on a daily basis. And I try to remember that and give grace, like you said, to folks, because, we probably see more of each other than we do our own families. Yeah. So we kind of, we need some sort of relationship in a positive way to do what we do. And we're, here for the students. So I'm going to end on that note, because, again, just being able to create a safe space so that people can come here and share things about themselves and feel comfortable enough to share things that, maybe some folks would hesitate to share, whatever their, stumbles may have been along the way. But I appreciate that you were willing to share that with me today, because that tells me a lot more about you. And that was the goal here, right? So thank you so much again. I'm looking forward to getting to know you even more during our work on the committee.
I love our residential college dining halls are a great place to eat and talk and get to know one another. Two of our residential colleges have great coffee shops, student-run coffee shops. Had a great cortado at Silliman yesterday.
Did you?
Yes.
I'll have to stop by.
Yes, you do.
I haven't been there in a while.
Do you know, have you been to
I've been to the Acorn and
the Bean.
What's the other one?
The Bean. At Franklin.
No, I haven't been there. Interesting. Do they have a Clover?
I don't know.
I'm kidding. So I oversee, for those who don't know, I oversee Clover for the colleges.
When you first said Clover, I thought like logo, because all the colleges have like their animal or plant.
Right.
And then I was like, I think I know the one place that doesn't now.
Okay. Yes, you do know. I have to stop in. And when I first saw the Acorn, I was like, this is so, again, thinking back to my 18-year-old self, I was like, this is so cool. I would have loved to be involved with just building something like this. And I, and that makes me happy, because it's like, okay, I contributed to that in some way. So, I have to stop by. I wish it was just a little closer to my office.
It's not so far.
I know, but in the morning, as you know, when you're running around with kids in the morning, it's a little
for
hectic.
Morning coffee.
Yes,
I'm not sure that they would be open that early.
Oh, really? Oh,
right.
well, because it's run by students, right?
Right. I will say that maybe what we could make as like a common goal, and I don't know if you're interested in this, is the college teas.
Yes.
I always want to go to more of those.
Me too. I would love to.
15 years I've been saying this.
Yes. I've been saying that too.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's get at least one together this academic year.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay.
I would love to. Yes. Let me know. I'm on. Count me in.
Okay.
That's awesome. So again, thank you so much, Marisa. As you know, we've posted we're posting the episodes on the Yale College site, but we're also now available on Spotify, Apple, and SoundCloud. So make sure you follow us,
I will.
and also on Instagram.
I'll follow
So
and rate.
yes, follow, please. Follow, likes, all that
Yes.
good stuff.
Yep.
Follow, like, share.
Yeah.
And again, thank you so much. I really appreciate getting to know you more. And again, this has been great for me because I love getting to know people and my extended family here
Yeah.
at Yale. So, yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.